America carries $36 trillion in debt. China sits under $15 trillion in debt. Japan is drowning in $10 trillion in debt. Germany, Britain, and France each owe trillions more. Guys, almost every major nation on this planet is buried in debt. The total global debt right now is $317 trillion. Let that number sink in. $317 trillion. That is roughly 330% of the entire world's annual economic output. Everything the world produces in a full year cannot even touch this debt. Honestly, if the entire world stopped spending for 3 straight years, we might just break even. But here is the question nobody is asking. If everyone is in debt, then who exactly is the lender? If the world owes $317 trillion, then someone out there holds $317 trillion in assets. Someone is sitting on the other side of every single one of those loans. Trust me, the answer to that question reveals the greatest wealth concentration in human history. This did not happen through war. It did not happen through theft in the traditional sense. It happened through a system where the majority always borrows and the minority always lends. A system where interest never stops growing. And here's where it gets really disturbing. The debt can never be fully paid off. Mathematically, it is impossible. So it just keeps growing, and wealth keeps silently flowing upward. If you want to understand who really controls the global financial system, stay right here. Subscribe to History Lab right now, because what comes next will change how you see money forever. Hit that bell and never miss the truths that others are too afraid to tell. Today, we are going to show you exactly who holds that $317 trillion in global debt. We will show you how this system creates debt but never creates enough money to repay it. We will prove this is not an accident. It is deliberate design. We will name the specific institutions and individuals profiting from permanent debt. And we will explain why this system must eventually collapse. Understanding this is not just about economics. It's about seeing how the global debt machine concentrates wealth into very few hands, and how it makes that concentration look completely natural and inevitable. But before we reveal who holds the debt, you need to understand what modern debt actually is.
Most people think debt works like a simple personal loan. You walk into a bank and borrow $10,000. The bank already has that $10,000 sitting in its vault. You pay it back with interest, and everyone goes home happy. Wait, this next part shocked even economists when they first learned it. Modern banking does not work that way at all. When a government borrows money by issuing bonds, that money does not already exist. The act of borrowing is literally what creates the money. Central banks and commercial banks purchase government bonds, and that money is created out of thin air, just digits typed into a computer screen. Here is a real example that will blow your mind. The US government needs $1 trillion. It issues treasury bonds to raise that money. The Federal Reserve announces it will buy $500 billion worth of those bonds. Commercial banks pick up the remaining $500 billion. Now guys, where does the Federal Reserve get that $500 billion? It does not have it. It simply types numbers into a computer and the money appears. $500 billion added to a balance sheet created from nothing. But here's the trap hidden inside that process. Only the original amount is created. The interest is never created. If the government borrows $1 trillion at 5% interest, it owes $50 billion every year on top. But the system only ever produced $1 trillion in the first place. So where does that $50 billion come from? Either the government borrows even more money in the future, or it taxes the existing money supply to claw it back. And here's where it gets really disturbing. Total debt always exceeds the total money supply. Always, mathematically, without exception. The interest is owed, but the money to pay it was never printed. So the system requires constant new borrowing just to service old debt. This is not a flaw. This is the design. Now let's talk about who actually holds all this debt. The answer breaks down into 4 main groups. First, central banks. Second, institutional investors. Third, foreign governments. Fourth, ultra-wealthy private individuals. Let's start with central banks. The Federal Reserve holds roughly $5 trillion in U.S. government debt. The Bank of Japan holds approximately $5 trillion in Japanese government bonds. The European Central Bank holds around $5 trillion in European debt. The People's Bank of China holds roughly $3 trillion.
Globally, central banks hold about $25 trillion in government bonds combined. That is about 8% of the total $317 trillion in global debt. But this is the foundation that makes everything else possible. Central banks allow governments to spend far beyond what they collect in taxes. They buy the bonds and manufacture the money to do it. Now, trust me, this next part is something almost nobody talks about. Who actually owns the central banks? The Federal Reserve is not owned by the U.S. government. It is a private institution owned by its member commercial banks. The 12 regional Federal Reserve banks issue shares to their member banks. JPMorgan Chase, Bank of America, Citibank, and Wells Fargo all hold these shares. These private banks collect a guaranteed 6% annual dividend on those shares. So when the Federal Reserve holds $5 trillion in government bonds and collects interest on them, that interest ultimately flows back to the private banks that own the Fed. The public believes the Federal Reserve is a government institution. It is not. It was created in 1913 specifically so private banks could profit from government debt. The Bank of England was created in 1694 on the exact same model. Guys, this system is over 300 years old, and it has been running ever since. And here's the final truth that this whole system points to. The global debt machine was not built to serve governments or citizens. It was built to serve the lenders, permanently, mathematically, by design. Every dollar of debt created is a dollar of wealth transferred to whoever holds that bond. Every interest payment made by a struggling government is income for a private institution. And because the interest can never be fully repaid, the cycle never ends. The debt grows, the wealth concentrates, and the system presents itself as normal. I'm telling you, once you see this, you cannot unsee it. The richest institutions in history did not get rich by producing things. They got rich by being on the lending side of a system that guarantees repayment forever. No one talks about this at the scale it deserves. The numbers are hidden in plain sight, in central bank balance sheets, in bond markets, in interest rate decisions made behind closed doors. But the truth about the $317 trillion global debt is far simpler than they want you to believe. Someone always collects, and that someone has been collecting for over 3 centuries. If this video changed the way you see the global financial system, subscribe to History Lab right now. We dig up the truths that others leave buried, and there is so much more still to uncover. Drop a comment below and tell us, did you know the Federal Reserve was privately owned? Because the truth about money, debt, and power is always stranger than anything they taught you in school.